It's good to be together this morning. I invite you to turn in the Gospel of John to the end of the book in chapter 21. And we'll be ending our thoughts as we've been going through the book and periodically kind of focusing on various aspects of John's teaching. And we've gone all the way through the cross and the resurrection. And one final piece that I think just kind of brings everything so much together and in a kind of summation way is this interaction that Jesus has with Peter, who he makes sure of all the disciples that needed to hear the news that Jesus had risen. He makes sure that tell Peter that Jesus has risen, and has several opportunities to show himself revealed to Peter. And then one very special, intimate moment that he has with him, and I want to look at that and focus on that here this morning. There in John chapter 21, we'll look at the text here as it unfolds for us. John chapter 21, beginning in verse 12. John 21:12 says, "Then Jesus said to them, 'Come and have breakfast.' None of the disciples ventured to question him, 'Who are you?' knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples, after he was raised from the dead. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him, 'Tend my lambs.' He said to him again a second time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him, 'Shepherd my sheep.' He said to him the third time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, 'Do you love me?' And he said to him, 'Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Tend my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go.' Now this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, 'Follow me.'" Peter has a very interesting relationship with Jesus. We see a lot of highs and lows, particularly in Peter's life, that I think is very helpful for us. I know it's always been helpful for me. Specifically, as I have my share of highs and lows, of moments where I feel like I'm very, very strong, and moments I feel like I just don't even know what I'm doing. And it seems like the Lord has this amazing relationship with Peter where he never gives up on him. And he never gives up on him for the one reason that he recognizes that despite the times when Peter thinks he knows what he's talking about, and he has this tremendous amount of zeal, but maybe he gets a little ahead of himself. And times when maybe he's so ashamed of himself. And times when he just goes to such lows that he feels like there's no way you would want anything to do with someone like me. And Jesus always kind of affirming, encouraging, and bringing him along. And Peter does seem to be someone full of extremes. In these highs and these lows, you see extreme levels of dedication, extreme levels of understanding, and an extreme level to show his dedication and his sacrifice. As remember when he professed, he said it was an extreme level of loyalty he wanted Jesus to know about him. He said, even if everybody else would be tempted to deny you, never me. Never. Anybody else maybe, but I would never deny you. Don't even tell me these things that are true, that I would even suggest that I don't even know who you are. He says, Lord, if you go to death, I'm going to be right there with you, and I will die with you. And we see an extreme, total opposite when he is tested to this, that he not only does he not go to the cross or die with Jesus, he literally does exactly what Jesus predicted. He says, I don't even know who you're talking about. With cursing, he wanted it understood that he has nothing to do with Jesus. And in this, Jesus has this moment with Peter that I've always found to be very, very encouraging. And I think whenever we have these extremes, these extreme highs and extreme lows, Jesus shows us the balance, and he shows us the truth, and shows us really the reality of what really we can expect of ourselves, and the reality of what Jesus himself looks at us and what he expects of us. Because with Jesus, there is an amount of hopefulness, amount of teaching of what we're capable of being, that if we trust him, if we follow him, he will lead us away from our sinfulness. He will lead us away from hopelessness. He will lead us away from a mundane life in this temporary existence to a heavenly realm. But along the way, he also understands, as he echoed in the garden, I know that your spirit is willing, but I also know that your flesh is weak. Jesus meets us in between, where we have this extreme high and this extreme low. And sometimes the extreme way we want to push ourselves, and the extreme way we sometimes just crumble ourselves down in a ball. Like, well, this is pointless. Why do I even try serving the Lord? I can't even do this right. And in the middle, Jesus has this balanced, tender, encouraging approach that I think he meets Peter here in this moment that I find very encouraging and helpful. And we want to focus here on this moment that Jesus has with Peter, trying to help him pick himself up, move along, continue on his journey, following him as he echoes that. That's the final thing he says, follow me. In other words, continue. Don't hinder yourself. I welcome you. I applaud you. I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to continue to pray for you, just as Jesus said he would in the Gospel of Luke. When he was even telling Peter that he would fail, he said, but remember, Peter, I've prayed for you. And remember that I pray that when you are restored, you will go back and you will strengthen your brothers. That you will be, hopefully, an encouragement in that regard. And I myself, as we talked about the fact that Jesus is not ashamed to call us his brothers. Last time we met, and we talked about these things. I find comfort to know that I consider Peter a brother. In many ways, because I find myself so many times feeling the way Peter did. I find myself sometimes when I have an extreme way, I want to push myself to attain to a certain levels that I know Jesus tells me is possible, but then times when I feel like I'm not attaining it and I've fallen so far short, I wonder why do I even bother? And maybe there are others who struggle with that. But Peter is a wonderful example for us, and Jesus uses Peter's struggle with these things, hopefully to help us, that we might find courage and strength to continue moving on, to continue serving him despite our weaknesses. And that's where the key things we want to focus on in this interaction is Jesus is affirming to Peter, I know about your weaknesses, I know your struggles, and despite these things, you are welcome to follow me. In fact, I'm going to continue to commission you to be a loyal helper and faithful follower in various roles of teaching and leadership, and even in roles of leadership. We recognize that leaders are not perfect people. Peter was eventually an elder of the church, and you catch this indication where Jesus is indicating that he will serve in that capacity. He will shepherd the flock. Peter is by any means a perfect shepherd, is never going to be a perfect leader, never going to be a perfect man by any means. And Jesus seems to be encouraging him to say, even despite your imperfection, I will help you, I will strengthen you, I will be there with you, and you continue to learn from me and follow me. But we notice that one of the things I want to point out is what Peter says when Jesus asks, do you love me? Because notice the first thing he says is, he kind of is reminding Peter, forcing him to kind of own up to, or maybe eat your words, so to speak, to kind of replay where Peter was when he said these things to Jesus. In fact, if you go back to Matthew chapter 21, chapter 26, in Matthew chapter 26, we see this interaction between Peter and Jesus. And in verse 31, Matthew chapter 26, verse 31, it says, "Then Jesus said to them, 'You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee.' But Peter said to him, 'Even though all may fall away because of you, I will never fall away.'" It's impossible. I'm too loyal. I'm far too deep. I have far too understanding. I'm far too committed. This would never, ever happen. And Jesus tries to bring him down to reality. Bring him down from his high place where and no doubt we sometimes give ourselves these pep talks. No doubt Peter wanted to be able to say this was true. But in reality, it wasn't. At least not at this time. And Jesus reveals to Peter, even though you wish you could say this, the reality is you will fall. But what I love about this is that Jesus is showing Peter, despite your weakness, I have not deserted you. So please don't desert me. Don't be so overly discouraged that you stop following this. There's this moment in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is indicating this to Peter. I'm praying for you. I'm rooting for you. I'm hoping that despite this weakness that you're going to be exposed with, and all your hopes and dreams of how loyal, how faithful you think you are, the reality of when you are tempted in that moment is going to humble you. But remember, I already know all about it. I've predicted it. I see it. And even in that weakness I see exists in you, I have faith in you. That's what Jesus was communicating to him at this moment. And it was here Peter in verse 33. Peter said to him, "Even though all may fall away because of you, I will never fall away." And here's the reality. The reality of verse 34 is, "Truly I say to you that this very night, before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. I would love to be able to say, because I am here on the first day of the week, and I am showing my loyalty to the Lord, to observe the Lord's Supper, to partake of the bread, to partake of the fruit of the vine, to show my loyalty and my dedication that I'm committing my life to Jesus as a sacrifice in my life because of the sacrifice He gave to me. Wouldn't it be pretty arrogant for me to say, because I'm here in this service this day, it's going to be impossible for me to sin this afternoon? Yet how many of us actually think that? Because I'm here, you just expect the best that I can possibly give the rest of this day. You realize it was in the context of this meal that they were observing when it was the Passover meal, and the first time they turned it into the Lord's Supper. It was in that context that He says, this very night, even after partaking of this meal, you are going to sin. Do we accept the reality that even though we have a desire to want to serve God, that we also have to own up and humble ourselves about the reality of where we really are at times? And understand how the Lord looks at that. We need to have a balanced reality of who we are, who we're striving to become, and how Jesus looks at that. And here is that window. We get to look at it, and we get to hopefully be encouraged to then live by faith because of this. Jesus is exposing Peter because he is too lofty, he is too proud, he is too arrogant. He just cannot see it. He has high hopes. We all do. But Peter also had major lows. In fact, go back to Luke chapter 5. Notice how low Peter got at one point because he felt that he had been so exposed because of his weakness, his tendency to speak up, maybe a little bit too soon. He spoke a little bit too soon, maybe a little bit too brashly when Jesus told him to let down his net. And Peter says, well, I fished all night and haven't caught a thing, but because you told me to, nevertheless, I'll do it. Remember what Peter said when he was kind of humiliated by what happened afterwards. He didn't think anything was going to happen. He tells you, I doubt anything's going to happen, but I'll do it because you told me to. Do you see how extreme? What is the extreme low? he falls down. And what does he say? Lord, get away from me, because I am a sinful man. I'm too sinful. You wouldn't want someone like me. I'm an embarrassment. I'm just going to keep making these kinds of mistakes. You won't want me in your team and your apostleship. Trust me. And what does Jesus do? He brings the reality. Don't be afraid. Don't beat yourself up so much over this. Notice what he says there. In Luke chapter 5, beginning of verse 6, it says, when they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them. And they came and filled both of the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw that, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, do not fear. From now on, you will be catching men. There are two extreme moments in Peter's life where Jesus tries to correct him that I love. What we're looking at John chapter 21 is Peter coming to realization he is now willing to find himself in the center place. At one point in time, he felt, my sins are just so much, I can't be trusted. You might as well just get away from me. And Jesus says, that's not how I look at it. On the other occasion, Peter says, I'm so loyal, I'm so faithful, it would be impossible to even think about me doing anything wrong. And Jesus, no, Peter, I wouldn't say that. Let me bring it down to reality. Both were occasions of how Peter looked at it in his eyes, his perspective. So notice how this changes. So Jesus gives Peter a chance to think about that night. When he said, Lord, even though everybody else might do this, it's never going to be me. Jesus tells him it's going to happen. And what does Peter do? Peter refuses to listen to Jesus. He says, far be it from me, Lord. It's not going to happen. But notice how Peter changes his mind when Jesus gives him the opportunity. He says, okay, Peter, remember when you said that you loved everybody more than me? I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer that question. And he does. Hence John chapter 21. Let's go back to John chapter 21. Notice how Peter answers this question. In John chapter 21, in verse 15, or excuse me, verse 12, verse 15. It says, so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, do you love me more than these? Notice what Peter says. Peter has now been humbled, and Peter says, Lord, you know that I love you. In other words, you know every one of my weaknesses. You've seen them exposed all my life. You even told me about my weaknesses, and I refused to believe they were there. I'm no longer an extremist. I'm no longer saying, well, because of my weaknesses, I can't serve the Lord. Or because I'm serving the Lord, it's impossible for me to fail. What he is saying is, Lord, I accept. You know that despite how great my love is for you, you also know how weak I am. And he's willing to let the chips fall where they are and say, Lord, I know that you know. In other words, you accept my loyalty. You accept my dedication. You accept my willingness to follow you, despite realizing that that does not mean that I'm infallible. That does not mean that it's impossible for me to fail. And it also means that even if I do fail, that you're not going to prohibit me from continuing on my journey. You know. In fact, back up a little bit further, and we understand why did Peter say this so emphatically? You know I love you. Because Peter has a moment where Jesus actually makes Peter repeat a moment from Luke chapter 5 before he even has this breakfast with him. Back up there a few verses to Luke chapter 20 or John chapter 21. John chapter 21 verse 1. It says, after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he manifested himself in this way. Simon, Peter, and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter, said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will also come with you. They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, children, you do not have any fish, do you? They answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Now, before we go any further, is this coincidence? This sounds... I smell something fishy here, but pardon the pun. I sense that maybe this happened to Peter sometime before. Oh yeah, we just read it in Luke chapter 5. Why is the exact same thing happening all over again? Because Peter is in the same frame of mind he was in Luke chapter 5, sensing, I probably don't deserve to be with someone like you. I have committed even a greater sin than I did in Luke chapter 5. It wasn't just doubting what you're capable of. He refused to acknowledge he even knew who Jesus was. And so notice what happens here. Jesus repeats this thing that Peter's going to be all too familiar with. So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he said, depart from me. I'm a sinful man. No, he does the opposite. He runs, he swims as fast as he can to the Lord. Knowing full well he's about to face the very one who he just said moments ago, a few days before, I have no idea who you're talking about. But remember what happened before Jesus even goes to the cross? The scripture says he looks at Peter, and Peter weeps bitterly. Isn't this interesting? Knowing how far he's failed, he doesn't swim away from the Lord in humiliation. He swims to him. Hence, when he has this interaction, when he says, Lord, you know I love you. You know all the complexities of all the imperfections of my love. I don't have a perfect love. And I know that you've taught me that that's okay. And I can follow you still despite my weaknesses. You taught me to pray about these things in the garden. You said, know that my weaknesses are apparent. I need to pray about them. And you said, you understand that it's there. And yet we need to do something about it. Yes, we need to seek his teaching. We need to seek to repent. We need to seek to put it behind us. But it's a complicated, messy journey that it is. And we operate often in extremism, as Peter did. Too sinful to go on, or it's just impossible. I put it all behind me. Never again, Lord. Really? What's the reality? What's the balanced, truthful? So when Peter says, you know I love you, he's confessing an imperfect love that he knows. Jesus sees all the well, and he knows it doesn't disqualify him. And it doesn't highly exalt him. It is what it is, so to speak. I love the expression somebody, it is what it is. I know too much about you, and I'm too impacted by you that I can't deny you. I can't leave you, and I have to continue following you. In fact, Peter later makes some comments based off of something Jesus tells him here. Notice what Peter says as a response. Peter says, you know that I love you. And it's amazing what Jesus says in response. He says, okay, then I want you to tend my sheep. In what capacity? Well, Peter later confessed he was an elder. He served as an elder of the church. You know, one of the first things he says that he learned about how to successfully lead and shepherd a flock, it's about humility. He says, all of us need to humble ourselves. And in that humility, recognize that Satan is on the prowl, and Satan, who also knows our weaknesses, we need to be honest, and we need to be forthright about our weaknesses. But just because I'm honest about the things that I fail and the things I struggle with does not make me weak. It makes me stronger, because then the Lord can teach me and do something about it. Which is the whole process of allowing Him to teach, to lead. And the shepherds are teaching and leading others to do that in true humility. In fact, go to 1 Peter chapter 5 and notice where Peter says this. Because this is the response that Jesus gives. Jesus tells Peter, one who accepts the reality of a messy faith, the reality of an imperfect love. That even someone messy in their development, imperfect in their love, Jesus Himself would put in a position of leadership and authority and say, you tend people. You watch over other people. How? In what capacity? Turn to 1 Peter 5 and notice what Peter says about this. In verse 1, 1 Peter 5 verse 1, he says, therefore I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. I'll say, here's the duty. Here's what you're trying to achieve. Here's what you have to strive to do. How? Verse 5. You younger men, likewise, be subject to your elders, and all of you, or all of us, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. For God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. The honest, as Peter is being honest here, he's saying, Lord, you know I love you. Words, I accept that even if I were to say this day, Lord, I've learned from my mistakes. Peter's hesitant to say, okay, I fell then. I'm not going to do it again. He doesn't say that. Peter says, I accept you see me. You see all of my flaws, all my imperfections, and you accept my love. I'm finally getting that. I'm finally learning that. And Peter then realizes that as an elder, as one who leads, it's not about saying, I figured everything out and I'm totally perfect in every aspect of my Christianity. No. That would be the opposite of what Peter just says to do here. Why does he say to humble ourselves? Because we need to be honest about how our adversary in the next few verses is going to chew us up and spit us out. Verse 6. This is why we have to be humble. Verse 6, therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you. This is exactly what he realized Jesus was telling him to do in the garden. He says that's what He meant when He said, pray that you may not enter into temptation. Be just totally honest. Where are my weaknesses? Where are those weak points? Throw them before the throne of God, humbling ourselves, acknowledging, Lord, I love you. You know I love you, but you also know how weak I am. And isn't this amazing? Peter's finally come to the terms, Jesus accepts an imperfect, work in progress love. Even those who lead. Why is it so important? Verse 8. Be of sober spirit. Be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And how did the devil get to Peter that night? By saying the very words, I'm too strong to fail. And Jesus trying to lower that down, but not too low. Not to the point of, oh, I'm just too sinful. No, you already said that, and you know that's not true. Through Peter's storied relationship, that's what we get to see. The reality of how he looks at all this. And we need that. Because we all, likewise, we have our varied weaknesses and struggles. Some just different than others. But verse 9, the way that we resist him, is first by humbling ourselves and casting ourselves before God. And isn't it amazing? You know, Jesus teaches us two aspects in the Lord's Prayer we referred to about this very thing. Like, what's the first thing he says when it comes to this issue? Forgive me my trespasses as I forgive others theirs. I think that's what he pretty much says there in 1 Peter chapter 5. Let's all humble ourselves. Let's cut out the charade that because we love God, that it's impossible for us to fail or fall in some way. Let's be honest about where we're really weak at. And let's ask God for forgiveness, and let's forgive others who inevitably are going to sin against us in some way. But then the other aspect of the prayer, but once I'm honest about that, I can also say, Lord, lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from the evil one. Let me ask you, what can you be delivered from, what you're not honest about, that you know he's going to attack you at? Peter is learning this. Hence, you know. What do you know, Lord? You know where I'm at right now. And even though I would love to say I'm past it, you see me. And that's all I've got. And even that, I'm going to swim towards you. I'm going to walk towards you. I'm going to cling to you. I'm not going to hide and pretend that it didn't happen. But that's what he says here. Notice in verse 9. But resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. In other words, you're not alone in this. Every one of us is fighting this battle. We're all in it together. So let's not exalt each other and compartmentalize. Well, these are the ones who really love the Lord. How about, I love the loyalty and the godliness and the might and the strength of the Lord, and I need that because there's weaknesses that I'm battling right now, and the Lord can do something about that. That's what Peter's accepting. And so Jesus ends it on this note. You know what I love about the way he ends this discourse? Let's go back there to John chapter 21 and see how this all unfolds. Because he repeats this question, and again, the third time, it just really grieves Peter, really gets to Peter. Because it's all too humbling to him, realizing, I know why you've said it this third time, because I had 3 opportunities to see I knew you, and I blew every one of them. And you told me I would. And now I get an opportunity to correct it. And notice what he says. Let's read it. John chapter 21, verse 15. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, shepherd my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. So again, there's this little sheepishness of Peter. He's humbled himself. He truly is not willing to be as exuberant and as audacious as he was previously. He's just accepting as it is. But notice what the next thing Jesus says. I love this. Jesus catching Peter, you've been humbled. Let me exalt you a little bit. Let me tell you something you may not be willing to accept right now. Remember back then when you said, I'm willing to die with you? How'd you do that last time? I know that's the thing, but I want you to think about it. How'd you do, Peter? No, you didn't do it, did you? Does that mean he's never going to die for the Lord? What's his next statement? Peter, I want to tell you something. I know you've been humbled. I know you're not willing to maybe be as audacious in your claims, but I want to tell you something. One of these days, you are going to do exactly what you said you were going to do. And you will die for me. Follow me, Peter. In other words, you may not be there today, but you stay with me long enough and you will be. That's the reality of following Christ. And we, by faith, need to accept it, or we can allow our self-righteous, judgmental eyes get in the way and not accept that that's how it is. Because that's the way it was for Peter. Even in his struggle, says Peter, yes, you strengthen your brother. You serve as a shepherd, but don't you forget, in your leadership, you humble yourself and you show others. You take the first step and you be honest and you humble and you recognize what are the areas where Satan is attacking you, where you need the Lord's strength because you cannot do it on your own. And the glory goes to the Lord because He fights for us. He strengthens us. He transforms us. And He makes us stand. And so we want to encourage anyone who's with us. And maybe someone with us is struggling with it. Maybe you have extremism in life as Peter did. Maybe the time you say, well, I'm here this morning. And because I'm here this morning, I'm never going to forsake ever again. Because I'm here this morning, I'm never going to fall into temptation. I'm never going to sin again. Don't you for a second start saying that. But don't you for a second also saying, it's just hopeless. I sinned last time and I'm going to sin again. How about realizing you can cast all of those anxieties before the Lord because He cares for you? Because, as Peter said, He knows you love Him. He knows how imperfect it is. He knows you struggle. But He's willing to work with you. If you faithfully accept that you need to strive to allow this teaching to change you, be honest when you fall, confess it, repent, turn away from it. But realize that it is a challenge, and it is a growth process. And if anyone is with us who's never obeyed the gospel, be encouraged to know that it's a learn as you go arrangement. As Jesus Himself says, it's come unto me all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Learn from me, He says. Take my yoke upon you. Yeah. You're going to know a whole lot at the beginning, and you're going to stumble along the way, but He's going to teach you, and He's loyal to do that. Whatever the case is, don't leave here without being as Peter was. Regardless of wherever you are, know that you can follow Jesus, because that's the last thing Jesus says to him. Notice in John chapter 21, verse 19. Now, this He said, signifying by what kind of death He would glorify God. And when He had spoken this, He said to him, follow me right now. Right now. Despite the fact you may think, well, it's going to be years before I get to where that is. The Lord doesn't care about that. He cares what you follow Him now. You see that Him just as I am. Yes, just as you are, follow Him. If we can help assist you in any way, what you need to do to follow Him, either in baptism or coming back to Him, why don't you do that while we stand and sing, come, follow Jesus, while we stand and sing the song of encouragement together.